He's doing it. RFK Jr. is actually doing it. And this is one of the biggest announcements out of the Trump administration thus far. RFK Jr., Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, has announced that he will have studies in front of you about the cause of autism in 3 weeks' time. Now, you might be thinking, 3 weeks? Didn't we talk about on the show yesterday or Monday? Is 6 months by September, which was what RFK promised President Trump in the cabinet meeting last week. Is 6 months enough time? How is it possible that he's going to have studies in 3 weeks? Well, first, listen to what the man says. Here it is.
And within 3 weeks, and probably we're hoping in 2 weeks, we're going to announce a series of new studies to identify precisely what the environmental toxins are that are causing it. This has not been done before. And we're going to do it in a thorough and comprehensive way, and we're going to get back to with an answer to the American people very, very quickly.
Okay, somebody asked me during the live stream, I think it was Monday's live stream, isn't it kind of risky for RFK to put a deadline on this information, to say, oh, we're going to have the answer to what's causing the autism epidemic by September? And I said, yeah, it's kind of risky, but I also love it. I love it because he's so committed to giving us an answer, and he's just being radically transparent about his process, that he's telling us, well, this is what we're doing. This is how long we expect it to take. So this is when we expect to have an answer for you. And he can always amend that if something unexpected comes up and he has to adjust the date. He can amend that. I love the fact that he's saying, this is what we're doing right now. We're going to have a study for you in 3 weeks. The question, or the second part of the question is it possible to have such information, to conduct a study into what environmental toxins might be contributing to the epidemic of autism diagnosis in our country? Is it possible to conduct a study, to have this information so quickly? 2 days ago, when we talked about the same topic, we had a video from the Dr. Peter Marks. He's a former government official who was a vaccine regulator. He was one of the guys at the top of the regulation chain, basically, in government, who was responsible for pushing the mRNA, the COVID vax, through. He said no, that it's not possible to have this information in 6 months unless RFK is relying on studies that have already been done. Dr. Peter Marks is incorrect in my view, and here's why. One of the things that RFK could do, and this probably wouldn't even take 2 weeks or 3 weeks, because it just takes the amount of time that the administrative tasks inherent to this would take. But you could take a cohort of people, you could take 3-year-olds or 6-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 12-year-olds, adults who are what the CDC would call fully vaccinated. You could take them and you could document their health outcomes, their autism diagnoses. Then you could take a cohort of people, the same age and demographic characteristics, can kind of controlling for the other factors, who are what the CDC would define as partially vaccinated. You could document their health outcomes. And then you could take a cohort of people who are unvaccinated and document their health outcomes. This would take a matter of days. This would take just as long as it takes to administratively collect that data. It doesn't have to be an observational study where you start observing babies from the moment of birth and you don't have a result of this study until they're 20 or 25 or 50 or whatever. It doesn't have to be something like that. The raw data, in a sense, if you want to think of the people as the raw data, they're already out there. They're already walking around. You just have to actually collect it in a scientifically sound way. In the live chat, Randy Hall says they probably already know. They're just confirming all the information and then they're going to announce it. I think that's probably correct, Randy, because think about what RFK Jr. has done in the course of the past 25, 30 years. This is what he's done. He's exposed the real data that contradicts the data that we have been told by public health officials for the past now going on 30 years. So yes, much of the work may already be done, or RFK may just know how to do it, know where to find it, and know how to get it done quickly. But 3 weeks, if he has even a preliminary answer to this question in 3 weeks, he said maybe 2 weeks, this hands down is the biggest announcement from the Trump administration so far. RFK also said in this address to the nation, he said the context of this health crisis is twofold. It's financial and it's individual. But the financial aspect of what our country is suffering is enormous. The cost of autism in our country in monetary dollars, we'll get to the human cost in a moment. The cost of autism in monetary dollars is going to cost us $1 trillion by 2035. Listen to this. Okay, then we'll bring this video up in a second. This is RFK just got off the air, and we're rolling with this live, which is what we do when we're live streaming. The point, though, is to differentiate between the monetary cost and the human cost of autism is incredibly important, because it sounds so bold to say this, but autism is a very profitable business. And I'm not just talking about Big Pharma. I'm not just talking about shots. I'm talking about the entire pipeline of what the infrastructure, I should say, not the pipeline, the infrastructure of what surrounds those who have been diagnosed with autism. Think about this. It's not just Big Pharma. It's hospital systems that deal with health crises that are due to autism diagnoses, doctors, and I'm talking both doctors' networks and individual practitioners. We're talking insurance companies. We're talking therapists, whether it's occupational therapists or physical therapists. We're talking even outside the medical industry, the healthcare industry. We're talking about the school system. Think about how many counselors and teachers' aides and special ed teachers. There is an enormous infrastructure that profits off of autism. And we have this video of RFK talking about the monetary cost. Take a listen to it.
There's a recent study by Blaxell et al. And a team of other researchers that said that the cost of treating autism in this country by 2035, so within 10 years, will be $1 trillion a year. This is added to already astronomical healthcare costs. And then there's an individual injury. These are kids that, this is a preventable disease. We know it's an environmental exposure. It has to be. Genes do not cause epidemics. They can provide a vulnerability. You need an environmental toxin. And Irva Hertz-Pichota pointed out that because of this mythology, that the amount of money and resources put into studying genetic causes, which is a dead end, has been historically 10 to 20 times the amount spent by NIH and other agencies to study environmental factors, to study exposures, to study external factors, and that's where we're going to find the answer.
This, by the way, I know we did an episode last week after RFK posted that post on X in which he praised the MMR vaccine, and we were like, what is going on? This is so out of character for RFK. Like, what is happening? This man that we just saw, this man that we just heard talking about the amount of money that autism makes, how that autism is a profitable business, and how even the scientific community is so captured by autism being a profitable business that they are, in a sense, willing to waste money on studying your genetic predisposition to this and ignoring the environmental factors because they don't want to know the answer. They don't want to know if it's the food. They don't want to know if it's the shots. They don't want to know if it's the chemicals that we put on our food. They don't want to know if it's fertilizers and weed killers and GMO and whatever else, stuff in our water, fluoride in our water. They don't want to know any of that. This is the man that we know and love. This is the man we wanted. This is the man we cheered for when he shook the hand of President Trump. And I, by the way, don't totally agree. This is a little tangential. I don't totally agree with RFK's stance that genetics are a dead end, because I do think that if you can identify specific genetics that cause you to be predisposed to certain conditions, and those conditions maybe are triggered by environmental toxins, then you, whether it's your child or even as adults, there are genetic predispositions to autoimmune diseases. You can make decisions for your children or for your own life, food and healthcare and environmental decisions that make them less likely to trigger what you know you are predisposed to trigger based on your genetics. So I don't know that it's an entirely dead end, but I understand what point RFK is making. He's saying the money to study the root cause was never an honest, authentic investigation because they don't want to know the answer. They don't want to know the answer. The human cost, I would argue, is much more important because these are children that we're talking about. These are our sons and our daughters. These children are the future of our society. So even if it is not your son and your daughter, these are the people that are in our communities, in our churches, and that make up the fabric of the future of our nation. And RFK courageously and without fear, and this is not common, by the way, for reasons we'll talk about in a minute, said very plainly that autism destroys families. Take a listen.
To study external factors, and that's where we're going to find the answer. This is an individual tragedy as well. Autism destroys families. More importantly, it destroys our greatest resource, which are our children. These are children who should not be suffering like this. These are kids who, many of them were fully functional and regressed because of some environmental exposure into autism when they're 2 years old. And these are kids who will never pay taxes, they'll never hold a job, they'll never play baseball, they'll never write a poem, they'll never go out on a date. Many of them will never use a toilet unassisted. And we have to recognize we are doing this to our children, and we need to put an end to it. And
gosh, I could cry listening to that. That is, of course, it just minimizes the political aspect of this. We can talk about big pharma corruption and big government corruption, and it needs to be talked about. And we can talk about the monetary cost to our society and those who actually, in a sense, benefit from autism because they benefit financially. We can talk about all of that, and it is very important. But it pales in comparison to how important it is to talk about what autism does to these beautiful people. There's an observation that I have made when a parent has a child who gets a diagnosis of ASD, which is the autism spectrum. Parents typically, and this is somewhat of a generalization, but it's an observation that I've had. Parents either observe that their child regressed after a certain thing at age 18 months, at age 12 months, at age 24 months, something that happened to that child caused this. And they feel very strongly about that. And they see it very clearly. They don't care what the doctor says that, oh, no, studies show that that's the cause. They don't care what the public health officials, they saw it before their very eyes and they know what's true. And then on the opposite end, there are parents whose children get a diagnosis of ASD or some kind of neurodivergence is what a lot of parents call it these days. And they take the very opposite point of view. They say, this is who my son is. I don't want to stigmatize the autism that my daughter has been diagnosed with because this is their superpower. Autism is their superpower. And they fear and they express a fear like my child, part of autism is a very high IQ, for example. Or this is what they express, that my son or daughter will lose this high IQ that comes with autism. And I want to address this directly to those who feel that way, because it is an almost impossible feat. It's an enormously painful and humbling thing to be able to overcome the hurdle to say, wow, something that we did is causing this harm to our children. That's an incredibly difficult thing to be able to admit. But no, your son or daughter with an autism diagnosis, high IQ is not part of that diagnosis. Your son or daughter has a high IQ, and maybe part of what comes with IQ and your genetic makeup makes you genetically more predisposed to an autism diagnosis. But no, your son or daughter would not lose that high IQ. That high IQ would just allow them to function and achieve and flourish, if not for the harm that's been caused them. Because we have to remember that an autism diagnosis is not just something that makes you different. It's not a superpower. It's incredible suffering. These children are nonverbal. They're incontinent. They have overstimulation and sensory issues that oftentimes restrict them from being able to take part in what we consider to be regular society. You see children that are constantly stimming. That's the rocking or the hand flapping or the spinning that you see in children, especially small children who are diagnosed with autism. And that's in addition to once they grow older, oftentimes children with autism lack empathy. They not only are some of them nonverbal, some of them have a hard time expressing or communicating nonverbally or recognizing nonverbal communication with other people. And this suffering, don't we want to end this suffering if we can? Don't we want to prevent this suffering if we can? And I think the answer to that from every single person on either side of the aisle should be a resounding yes. RFK often talks about the story where he says he's spent the last 30 years every morning dropping to his knees and praying to God, asking God to give him the opportunity to help these children. And that's where we are right now. On that show last week where I said, what's going on with RFK and his weird X posts? And I still don't know the answer to that. But last week I said, RFK needs to step it up. And let me tell you, this address to the nation, this press conference that he held, this is exactly what we are looking for. And RFK Jr. in the coming weeks, in the coming months, he is going to need our support if he is going to be able to produce the results from the studies that are going to make a difference in our society, because there are many, many forces that are trying to impede him. But really, it's not just him. What they're impeding is the health and flourishing of our children.